He was born with nothing, yet dreamed of everything. From stealing on the streets of Medellín to building a cocaine empire worth billions, Pablo Escobar rewrote the rules of power. He bought loyalty with money, silenced enemies with bullets, and rose to become the most feared don the world had ever seen. Decades after his death, his name still sparks fear, fascination, and endless debate. Was he a monster, a savior, or a myth too big to die? He started with nothing, built an empire of billions, and became the most feared don the world still can't forget.
Pablo Emilio Escobar Gaviria was born on December 1, 1949, in Rio Negro, a small town near Medellín, Colombia. His father, Abel de Jesus, worked as a humble farmer, while his mother, Hermilda, was a devoted schoolteacher. The family lived modestly, struggling to make ends meet in a country divided sharply between the powerful rich and the powerless poor. From the very beginning, Pablo showed signs of ambition far beyond his environment. Unlike other children who dreamed of becoming soldiers, teachers, or priests, Pablo's eyes gleamed with something else. He wanted money, respect, and a name that would echo across the streets of Medellín. At school, he would whisper boldly to his classmates, "I will be a millionaire by the time I'm 30." No one laughed, because even as a boy he carried an aura of certainty, as if he already knew his destiny was greater than the poverty he was born into. The dusty streets of Medellín had shaped countless forgotten children, but for Pablo, they were only the first step toward a world that would one day fear his name. Pablo Escobar's journey into crime began early, long before the world would call him the king of cocaine. As a restless teenager roaming the streets of Medellín, he quickly realized that rules were chains meant to be broken. His first schemes were small but bold, stealing gravestones from cemeteries, scraping off the names, and selling them to smugglers who repurposed the marble. Soon, he moved on to forging high school diplomas and university certificates, selling fake credentials to desperate students who dreamed of a better life. Each trick brought him more money, but more importantly, it brought him confidence. He wasn't just surviving, he was learning the art of manipulation, of turning opportunity into profit. Pablo understood something most boys his age didn't. Crime was a business, and every risk was an investment. With each small victory, he sharpened his instincts, building the ruthless mindset that would one day make him untouchable. Medellín's streets had given him his education, and now they would give him his empire. By the early 1970s, Pablo Escobar had already tasted the thrill of smuggling contraband, but he was searching for something bigger, something that could transform him from a street hustler into a global power. That opportunity arrived in the form of a white powder, cocaine. At first, it was a quiet secret known only to a few, a luxury for the rich in Miami and New York. But Pablo saw what others didn't. He saw an ocean of demand waiting to be flooded. Where others hesitated, fearing the risk, Escobar smelled destiny. He began moving small shipments, testing routes across borders, bribing airport workers, and recruiting loyal pilots. The profits were staggering, dwarfing anything he had ever seen before. Every successful run fed his ambition, convincing him that cocaine wasn't just another hustle, it was the future. To Pablo, this was no longer crime, it was empire building. And with each shipment, he was laying the foundation for a cartel that would soon make the world tremble. As cocaine profits soared, Pablo Escobar realized he could not build an empire alone. He needed an army, a network, and absolute control over every link in the chain. Out of this vision, the Medellín Cartel was born. Escobar partnered with ruthless men, Carlos Leder, Jorge Ochoa, and José Gonzalo Rodríguez Gacha, each bringing their own skills, but all bowing to Pablo's ambition. Together, they turned cocaine trafficking into a global business with military precision. Airplanes flew across the Caribbean under the cover of night, their bellies stuffed with bricks of cocaine. Speedboats dashed toward Florida's shores, and even submarines quietly slipped through waters to deliver the product. Laboratories hidden in Colombia's jungles worked day and night, producing tons of cocaine to feed America's insatiable appetite. By the late 1970s, Escobar's cartel controlled nearly 80% of the world's cocaine market. Medellín was no longer just a city, it was the capital of a criminal empire. And at its throne sat Pablo Escobar, the man who had transformed from a petty thief into the most powerful drug lord on earth. By the early 1980s, Pablo Escobar was drowning in wealth, so much money that counting it became impossible. His cartel earned nearly $70 million every single day, a fortune so vast that entire warehouses were filled with stacks of US dollars. Rubber bands were purchased by the ton just to keep the bills together, and billions were hidden in fields and abandoned houses across Colombia. Many of those secret stashes were lost forever, eaten by rats or rotting beneath the soil, yet it hardly mattered, there was always more coming in. Escobar became notorious for bizarre expenses. He once burned $2 million in cash just to keep his daughter warm during a cold night on the run. To the poor of Medellín, he became a hero, a Robin Hood figure who built houses, schools, and soccer fields. They called him El Patron, the boss. To the government, however, he was a monster, flooding the world with cocaine and buying loyalty with blood money. In Escobar's world, cash wasn't just power, it was a weapon. For Pablo Escobar, wealth was not enough, he craved legitimacy, the kind that money alone could not buy. In the early 1980s, he set his sights on politics, believing that if he could control the government, he could secure his empire forever. He entered Colombia's Congress with a carefully crafted image, a successful businessman, a generous benefactor to the poor, a man of the people. In the slums of Medellín he was adored. He built housing projects, handed out food, and funded soccer tournaments. The poor saw him as their savior, the only man who cared for them in a country that had forgotten their struggles. But the Colombian elite knew the truth. To them, Escobar was not a politician, he was a criminal in disguise, a wolf in a tailored suit. When one brave minister publicly exposed his ties to the drug trade, Escobar's mask cracked. The world now knew who he truly was. Politics had given him a taste of respect, but it also painted a target on his back. And Pablo Escobar, unwilling to bow to anyone, prepared to strike back with blood. When politics threatened to strip away his power, Pablo Escobar responded with the one language he trusted most: violence. Judges who dared to prosecute him, journalists who exposed him, police officers who stood in his way, all became targets. Car bombs ripped through city streets, assassins roamed Medellín on motorcycles, and fear became part of daily life in Colombia. Escobar coined a phrase that would define his rule: Plata o Plomo, silver or lead. Take the bribe and live, or refuse and die. The choice was brutally simple. With money, he bought loyalty from politicians, police, and entire neighborhoods. With bullets, he silenced anyone who stood against him. Even presidential candidates were not safe. When Luis Carlos Galán, who vowed to fight drug lords, ran for office, Escobar's men gunned him down in front of thousands. It was no longer crime, it was war. And Escobar, ruthless and unyielding, was winning. Medellín had become his battlefield, and Colombia his kingdom of fear. By the mid-1980s, Pablo Escobar had risen to a level of power the world had never seen in a criminal. Forbes magazine listed him among the wealthiest men alive, with an estimated fortune of more than $30 billion. His private estate, Hacienda Nápoles, was larger than many towns, complete with swimming pools, an airstrip, and a private zoo filled with hippos, elephants, and giraffes. He threw lavish parties for politicians, celebrities, and athletes, all while controlling nearly 80% of the world's cocaine trade. Yet behind the extravagant lifestyle, paranoia consumed him. He traveled with armies of bodyguards, switched safe houses constantly, and trusted no one fully, not even his closest allies. Every handshake might hide betrayal, every shadow might carry a bullet. Still, to millions of poor Colombians, he was a saint who gave them homes, jobs, and hope. To governments worldwide, he was a menace, a drug king whose empire had grown so powerful it threatened entire nations. Pablo Escobar was no longer just a man, he was a legend, feared like a dictator and worshipped like a god. By the late 1980s, Pablo Escobar's empire, once untouchable, began to crack under the weight of enemies closing in. The Colombian government, with the full backing of the United States, declared war on the Medellín Cartel. Elite police units, military squads, and American DEA agents worked together with one mission: bring down El Patron. But it wasn't only governments he had to fear. His rivals, the Cali cartel, and even former allies turned against him, funding a ruthless vigilante group known as Los Peeps, people persecuted by Pablo Escobar. These assassins hunted down his men, burned his properties, and slaughtered his associates, piece by piece dismantling his empire. Billions of dollars were seized, his smuggling routes collapsed, and his once loyal soldiers abandoned him. Once feared as the king of cocaine, Escobar was reduced to a fugitive, hiding in jungle hideouts and dingy safe houses, constantly on the move. His paranoia grew worse. He changed locations almost daily, used phones sparingly, and trusted only his family. The man who once ruled Colombia with bombs and bribes was now running for his life, a hunted king watching his kingdom turn to dust. On the afternoon of December 2, 1993, the hunt for Pablo Escobar reached its final chapter. After months of being chased across Colombia, the intelligence team known as the Search Block, aided by U.S. agents and Los Peeps, finally tracked him down to a middle-class neighborhood in Medellín. Escobar was hiding in a small safe house with just one bodyguard. When the police surrounded the building, chaos erupted. Escobar, barefoot and desperate, grabbed a pistol and ran across the rooftops, firing wildly as he tried to escape. For a man who once commanded armies and built an empire of billions, it was a pitiful sight, one of the richest men in the world, cornered like prey. Gunfire echoed through the narrow streets, until a bullet struck him near the ear. Pablo Escobar fell face down on the red-tiled roof, blood spilling into the cracks. The king of cocaine, the man who once controlled nations with fear and fortune, was dead at 44 years old. For some, his death was justice; for others, it was the end of a legend. Yet even in death, Pablo Escobar's name refused to fade, etched forever into history as both a villain and a myth.